Welcome to another deep dive. We've got some really cool stuff to unpack today, all about artificial intelligence. You sent over some really fascinating research and articles, even some excerpts from CambridgeAI.pdf, which looks at all the legal and ethical stuff. So yeah, get ready. Today, we're going to cut through all the AI hype to figure out what it actually is, what it can do, what it can't do, and how we're even trying to, keep it under control.
It sounds like a plan. I'm ready.
Going through all this stuff, I just couldn't stop thinking about, how people have been dreaming about artificial beings forever, like golems, Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah.
These ideas have been with us for ages.
Totally. The idea of creating something intelligent, something that can mimic our own abilities is just fascinating to us humans. But the actual term artificial intelligence, it's actually pretty new. It was coined back in 1955 at Dartmouth. And the core of it, AI, is all about machines trying to, copy human intelligence, especially our ability to learn and reason.
Makes sense. It's like those two modes of thinking psychologists talk about, right? System one, which is like fast and intuitive, like recognizing a cat in a picture. And then system two, which is slower, more deliberate, like planning out your next chess move. Is AI trying to do like both of those things?
Yeah, you got it. Actually, one of the biggest challenges in AI research right now is figuring out how to combine those two systems, how to get them to work together effectively. We've made some progress, but we're not quite there yet.
So it's like you're trying to build a machine that can just instinctively recognize patterns, but also like think strategically at the same time. That sounds crazy complex.
It is. But even way back in the early days of AI research, they were already making some breakthroughs in one of these areas, machine learning.
Oh, and speaking of early breakthroughs, I was totally blown away by that story about Arthur Samuel's checkers program,
Yeah.
from back in the 1950s. That was like one of the first times a machine actually learned and got better at its game over time.
Yeah, it was a huge step forward.
Yeah.
And game-playing AI has come so far since then. You probably heard of Chinook, the program that mastered checkers in the 1990s.
Hmm.
Now, checkers is considered a solved game, which means a perfect player, whether it's a human or machine, can never lose.
Whoa, solved. That's kind of wild, right? Like, what does it even mean for a game to be truly solved? Does that, tell us anything about the nature of intelligence itself?
Now, that's a good question. And it's something that AI researchers are still, trying to wrap their heads around. But let's not forget about chess, another game AI has conquered. In 1997, Deep Blue, a chess-playing computer from IBM, it beat Garry Kasparov, the world champion. That was like a huge moment for AI.
Mm-hmm.
Then in 2016, you have AlphaGo, developed by Google DeepMind, taking on Go, this ancient game that's so complex people thought AI would never be able to play it at a high level. And you know what? AlphaGo won.
I remember reading about AlphaGo. It seemed like everyone was talking about it.
It was a big deal. But as impressive as these game-playing AIs are, they kind of rely on pattern recognition and brute force computation. They don't really understand the game in the same way a human does.
Which brings us back to that thing you said earlier about AI systems, not really understanding. I gotta admit, I've played around with ChatGPT, and it's amazing at creating text that sounds like a person wrote it. But I've also seen it give some pretty crazy route descriptions. It even makes stuff up sometimes.
Right. That's a common issue with these big language models. They're really good at copying patterns in human language, but they don't always get the actual meaning or context. They can, hallucinate is what we call it, which can lead to some funny results, but also some misleading ones.
Okay, so if these systems are so good at learning patterns, where does machine reasoning fit in? How does that even work?
Well, machine reasoning is a different approach. It uses what we call symbolic representation. So it uses rules, facts, and logic to solve problems.
Mm.
Imagine a detective piecing together clues. That's kind of how machine reasoning works.
So instead of just recognizing patterns, it's about understanding the relationships between things and drawing, logical conclusions. Got it.
Exactly. And one really cool application of machine reasoning is in understanding complex systems, like tax legislation. Just imagine an AI system that can not only analyze tax laws, but also predict what might happen if those laws are changed. That kind of reasoning power would be super valuable.
It would be so interesting to see how that would play out in the real world.
Totally. And there's another fascinating side to machine reasoning, the probabilistic side. This is where you use things like Bayesian networks to model uncertainty and how different variables are connected. It's like, think about diagnosing a medical condition. Doctors have to consider all sorts of symptoms and how likely they are to come up with the right diagnosis, right? Bayesian networks can help AI systems do the same kind of thing.
So it's like weighing different possibilities and figuring out the most likely explanation. That seems incredibly useful, especially in fields like medicine.
It is. And Bayesian networks are just one example of all the amazing tools AI researchers are developing to help machines reason about the world in more sophisticated ways.
This is all sounding so promising, but I know there's like a whole other side to this conversation that we can't ignore, the ethical implications of AI.
Yeah, you're right. We can't just focus on the technical stuff without thinking about how it might affect society. AI is a really powerful tool, and you know what they say, with great power comes great responsibility. We need to think carefully about how AI is developed and used so that it benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Absolutely. And from reading the stuff you send over, it seems like AI is bringing up a whole bunch of ethical dilemmas. Like, where do we even begin with that?
Well, I think the first step is acknowledging that there are no easy answers. Humans are complicated, and AI can amplify both the good and the bad stuff we do. So we have to be thoughtful and, you know, proactive about addressing the potential risks while also, using the power of AI for good.
Yeah, it's not about like being scared of AI or blindly embracing it. It's about finding a responsible way to navigate this whole new landscape. And one ethical issue that really stood out to me was the problem of bias in AI systems. Like if an AI is trained on biased data, it's just going to perpetuate that bias, right? And that could have some really bad consequences, especially in fields like healthcare or criminal justice.
You're absolutely right. Bias in AI is a huge concern. If we're not careful, these systems could end up making existing inequalities in society even worse.
And it's not just about bias. There are also worries about privacy, sustainability, plagiarism, and even what's going to happen to jobs. Like, will AI systems like ChatGPT end up replacing writers and artists? These are big questions we got to be asking ourselves.
Definitely big questions. And there are no easy answers. The future of AI is being shaped right now. It's crucial that we have these conversations. We talk openly and honestly about what could go right and what could go wrong.
Totally agree. It's not just about the technology itself, it's about the kind of future we want to live in. And speaking of shaping the future, it seems like governing AI is becoming a really big focus. Like, how do we even start regulating something so complex and changing so fast?
Yeah, that's the question policymakers all over the world are struggling with. We're seeing a shift from these voluntary ethical guidelines to more actual laws and regulations. The European Union, for example, is kind of leading the way with their AI Act.
I'm really curious about this AI Act. From what I've read, it sounds like they're trying to find that sweet spot between encouraging innovation, but also, protecting people from potential harm. Is that even possible there? Some people say that too many regulations could stifle progress.
It's a valid point. But we also have to remember that if AI development isn't checked, there could be some seriously bad consequences. It's about finding that balance between harnessing AI's power for good while minimizing the risks.
This deep dive has been so fascinating. It's clear that AI is going to change our lives in huge ways. But there's one question that's been sticking with me from all this research. Even if we crack all the technical challenges of AI, will we be able to make sure these powerful systems align with human values? What role should regular people like us have in shaping the future of AI?
Those are fantastic questions.
Yeah.
And they highlight the fact that this isn't just a tech issue, it's a societal issue. It's about who we are as humans and the world we want to create.
That's such a great point. We can't just leave the future of AI to the engineers and politicians. We all have a responsibility to be a part of this.
Absolutely. The future of AI isn't set in stone. It's something that we're all building together.
Well, we've covered a lot in this deep dive so far, from like the philosophical side of AI to the challenges of regulation, from all the potential benefits to those tricky ethical dilemmas. It's clear that this is something we need to keep exploring and talking about.
You know, it's interesting how this whole conversation about AI ethics is kind of changing. It used to be all about these high-level principles, almost like, aspirational guidelines. But now we're seeing real steps towards actual laws and regulations,
Yeah.
like the AI Act.
Oh, yeah, the AI Act. You were saying how the EU seems to be taking the lead in regulating AI, but how do they actually plan to define and categorize all these different AI systems in practice? It seems like it's constantly changing.
You're right, it is a super dynamic field. The AI Act deals with this by taking a risk-based approach. It focuses on AI systems that have the biggest potential to cause harm, to people and society.
So instead of trying to come up with this, like, giant list of every single possible AI system out there, they're looking at the ones that could really impact people's lives, right?
Exactly. They actually have a specific list of these high-risk AI systems. It's in Annex 3 of the Act. These cover super important areas like critical infrastructure, law enforcement, and healthcare. Systems where bias or errors could have really serious consequences.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like healthcare, that's a great example. AI is being used more and more for things like diagnosis and treatment recommendations, but the stakes are so high there. A wrong decision by an AI could be, life or death.
It totally could. AI in healthcare is definitely considered high risk,
Yeah.
and the AI Act has a bunch of specific requirements for those systems. For instance, they need to be developed and tested to these really strict standards.
Hmm.
And there needs to be like clear documentation explaining how they work and what data was used to train them.
So transparency is key, right? It's like
Yeah.
saying, show us your work so we can understand how these AIs are making their decisions.
Exactly. And probably the most important thing, the AI Act emphasizes that humans need to be overseeing these high-risk systems to make sure they're being used responsibly and ethically.
That's such an important point. We can't just blindly trust these systems, especially when it comes to something as sensitive as, someone's health.
Absolutely. The AI Act gets this and really pushes for human agency and control when using AI. It's not about replacing humans with machines. It's about using AI as a tool to, help us make better decisions.
But what happens if something goes wrong with one of these high-risk AI systems? Like, who's ultimately responsible? Is it the company who made it, the person using it, or someone else entirely? That seems kind of murky.
That's a really good question. And it's something that the AI Act actually addresses with this new liability framework that's specifically for AI systems.
Yeah.
It aims to clarify who's responsible for any damage caused by AI, even if it's hard to say exactly where the fault lies.
Yeah, I can see how that would be really tricky to figure out, especially with these complex AIs that are always learning and changing. It's not always black and white who's to blame when things go sideways.
No, it's not. And that's exactly why transparency and explainability are so important. The more we understand how these AI systems work and what's influencing their decisions, the better we'll be able to say, okay, this is where things went wrong, and hold the right people accountable.
It's like being a detective, but for AI. We got to trace the steps and figure out the logic behind what the AI did to understand where things went off track.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And even with the best intentions, AI systems can still have these unexpected negative impacts. Like, how do we even protect ourselves from that?
That's a scary thought. Unintended consequences with something as powerful as AI, that could be a real problem.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why the AI Act stresses how important it is to constantly monitor and evaluate these systems. So once a high-risk AI system is up and running, it needs to be checked all the time to make sure it's working like it should.
Yeah.
And if there are any of these unintended consequences, they need to be spotted and dealt with quickly.
So it's not like you just set it up and forget about it. You need to constantly be checking and making adjustments to make sure these AI systems are being used safely.
Exactly. It's an ongoing thing. And the AI Act is trying to create a framework to guide that whole process.
So it sounds like they're trying to come up with a really thorough set of rules. But, will it even be enough to keep up with how fast AI is changing?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. The AI Act is a huge step forward, but AI is a field that's constantly evolving. We're going to have to constantly be adapting and fine-tuning the regulations to make sure they're still effective in dealing with all the new challenges that AI throws at us.
It makes you wonder what the future holds for AI regulation, right? Will other countries follow the EU's lead, do you think?
There's definitely a lot of interest worldwide. The EU is seen as like a leader in this, but other countries like the US, Canada, and China, they're all looking at different ways to approach AI governance too.
It's good to hear that there's this global recognition that AI needs to be regulated. But won't it be hard to get everyone on the same page and, make sure these different approaches all work together, especially since each country probably has their own priorities, right?
It's definitely going to be a challenge. Different countries have different values and priorities, so their regulations will probably reflect that. But finding ways to, work together and share best practices will be super important in figuring out how to deal with the ethical and societal effects of AI on a global scale.
It sounds like figuring out the future of AI is going to require walking this really fine line between letting innovation happen, protecting people from getting hurt, and getting different cultures and political systems to find some common ground.
You're absolutely right. It's complicated, and there's no easy solution. But, having open and honest conversations like we're having right now, that's a great place to start.
Speaking of being open and honest, it makes me wonder how much the average person even knows about AI and how it could affect their lives. There's so much hype and just like wrong information out there, it's hard to know what to believe.
Oh, yeah, you're right on the money with that. There's a ton of hype and misinformation about AI floating around, and it can be really overwhelming trying to make sense of it all. In science fiction, AI is always portrayed as either this like amazing savior or this terrifying threat. But the reality is a lot more complicated than that.
And it's so easy to get lost in all the technical stuff and like complex concepts. Even just trying to grasp how these AI systems work can be tough.
For sure. And that's why it's so important to break it down and make AI easier to understand for, everyday people. We need to be having these conversations, talking openly and honestly about the good stuff AI could bring and the bad stuff too. And we need to give people the knowledge to make informed decisions about how this tech is used in their own lives.
So it's not just about understanding how the AI works, it's about understanding how it might affect us ethically and socially too.
Exactly. We have to encourage people to think critically about the values that are built into these AI systems
Yeah.
and how those values might impact our social structures, our relationships, and even our sense of who we are.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the risks and anxieties about AI, but we can't forget about the amazing potential it has to do good. Like, AI could totally revolutionize healthcare, help us fight climate change, and open up all these crazy new opportunities we can't even imagine yet.
I totally agree. It's important to remember that tech, at its core, is a tool. It can be used for good or bad, and the choices we make now will determine what happens with AI and how it affects humanity. We're already seeing AI doing some pretty amazing things, like developing new treatments for diseases, figuring out how to use energy more efficiently, and even creating personalized learning experiences.
It's really inspiring to think about all the ways AI could make the world a better place. But it also reminds us that we have to be careful and deliberate about how we develop and use this technology.
You're absolutely right. We need to go into AI development and deployment with a strong sense of responsibility and a commitment to doing what's right.
And it's not just about setting rules and regulations. It's about having these conversations, really engaging in open dialogue and debate about the future we want to create with AI. What kind of society do we want to build with this technology?
You've hit on something really important here. AI is kind of forcing us to answer some big questions about what it means to be human. Like what is intelligence? What is consciousness? What are our values? These are things philosophers have been thinking about forever, but now in the age of AI, they're becoming even more urgent.
It can be a little daunting, but it's also super exciting. AI is pushing us to think bigger, to reimagine what's possible, and to shape a future where technology is there to help us, not control us.
And it's a journey we got to take together, with a shared commitment to using this powerful technology for good.
Well, we've really gone deep in this deep dive. We've talked about the philosophy behind AI, the challenges of regulating it, the potential benefits, and all the ethical dilemmas. And honestly, it feels like we've just scratched the surface of this huge and rapidly changing field.
It has been quite a whirlwind tour, but I think we've managed to unpack some of the key issues and give people a way to think about how complex AI really is. I hope it's made you want to learn more and be a part of this ongoing conversation about the future of AI.
We can't just sit back and let technology tell us what our future is going to be. We need to be active in shaping a world where AI empowers us, not the other way around.
Totally. And that starts with understanding the technology, what it can do, what it can't do, and how it might affect us ethically. It's about making informed choices and fighting for the kind of future we want.
We've talked a lot about how the EU is tackling AI regulation, but it seems like there are all these different laws and rules popping up everywhere. Like, how do we avoid ending up with each country having its own AI rulebook? Wouldn't that just cause a lot of confusion and maybe even slow down progress?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Having all these different regulations for AI in different places, it's definitely something to worry about. It can make it much harder for countries to work together and share ideas, which would slow things down.
Mm.
That's why it's super important for countries and regions to talk to each other and try to cooperate.
So, are there like any international groups trying to get everyone on the same page with AI regulation, working towards a more unified approach?
Mm. Actually, there are already quite a few initiatives going on. For example, that OECD has these principles on AI that a lot of countries have agreed to. And the Council of Europe is working on a treaty about AI that's aiming to set some common ethical and legal standards.
So it's like they're trying to write a global rule book for AI, even though the technology is still like changing so fast. Seems like a pretty tough job.
It's a huge challenge for sure,
Yeah.
but it's really important. We need to find a way to balance things, allowing for innovation to keep going while also making sure AI is being developed and used responsibly so it benefits everyone.
It's interesting how different countries are approaching this. Some seem to be really focused on pushing AI development as far as it can go, while others are being more careful, emphasizing the need for rules and minimizing risks.
That's true. And these different approaches often reflect the specific culture, economy, and politics of each country. But finding ways to, bridge those differences and find some common ground will be super important in navigating the global impact of AI.
We've been talking about governments and international organizations, but what about us, regular people? What can we do to shape the future of AI? It's easy to feel like all this big tech stuff is totally out of our control.
That's something I think about a lot. Individuals actually have a really crucial role to play here. We need to be informed citizens, taking part in discussions, asking tough questions, and holding the people in power accountable. We need to push for transparency, demand to know how AI systems work, and make sure they're aligned with our values.
Yeah, I get that feeling of being powerless sometimes, like when you think about how big and powerful this technology is. But you're right, we all have a responsibility to get involved. We can't just sit back and passively accept whatever happens with AI.
Absolutely. We need to be proactive in shaping the future. We need to stand up for ethical AI development and use and ensure that this technology helps humanity, not the other way around.
One thing that's been on my mind a lot during this whole deep dive is the connection between AI and power. Like, who's really in control of AI, who benefits from it, and who ends up taking on the risks? These seem like some pretty fundamental questions.
They're such crucial questions. AI isn't neutral. It's shaped by the values and goals of the people who create and use it. It can be used to strengthen the power structures that already exist, or even create new ones. We really need to pay attention to how AI is changing the balance of power in our societies.
And, we talked earlier about bias in AI systems. If those systems learn from biased data, they're just going to keep those biases going, which could make inequality even worse. Feels like there's a real danger that AI could be used to further marginalize certain groups of people.
That's a very real concern, and we need to be very aware of it. And we also need to consider how much power is concentrated in the hands of just a few big tech companies. They're the ones who control so much of the data and the infrastructure that AI depends on. We have to ask ourselves whether that concentration of power is really helping to create a fair and more just world.
So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about the political and economic systems that influence how it's developed and used. It seems like AI is really bringing all these deeper issues to the surface.
You said it. If we want to make sure that AI benefits everyone, we need to address those power imbalances and make sure the benefits and risks of AI are shared more fairly.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. AI and how it's going to change our society, it's so complex. It's clear that we're just at the start of this journey, and there are going to be a lot of challenges along the way. But there are also so many possibilities, it's exciting.
I agree. It's a really exciting time. AI has the potential to completely transform our world in ways we can't even imagine right now. The key is to approach this technology with a sense of responsibility, stick to our ethical principles, and have a clear vision of the future we want to create.
It's been such a fascinating journey. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the world of AI. I hope this has sparked your curiosity and encouraged you to keep learning, asking questions, and being a part of shaping the future of AI.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you. And remember, the future of AI isn't set in stone. We're all creating it together, so let's make it a future worth living in.
That's a perfect way to end things. And to you, our listener, thank you for sharing your incredible research with us. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for an AI future that works for all of humanity.